Good evening, my name is Dave Reagan. Thank you for being here tonight at my home. My lovely wife to the right of me have invited you all here to be here tonight. We're going to talk about education. We have a very special guest here tonight, Professor Theoharris, and I'd like to just give you a little background on him, and he'll get up and speak to you in regards to that. Professor Theoharris graduated from Williams College in 1977 and received his doctorate from the University of California, Berkeley in 1984. He has taught at Berkeley, MIT, and since 1985 at Harvard, where he is now an associate in the Department of Comparative Literature. All three universities have honored him with their highest undergraduate teaching awards. He has lectured widely in the United States and Europe, most notably at Oxford, and at the invitation of the America's ambassadors to Ireland, Jean Kennedy Smith, at the ambassador's residence in Phoenix Park, Dublin. He has written many books and has numerous consultations with cultural institutions and artists. He lives in Cambridge, Mass., and it is my honor to introduce Professor Theoharris.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, David. Hello.
Hello.
It's great to be with you tonight. The topic of our discussion is a novella by Tolstoy called The Death of Ivan Ilyich, which I read this afternoon again so that I would know what I was talking about when I came here tonight. And which I have taught a couple of times. I remember the first time I was a graduate student, I was an assistant teacher in a, actually no, it was my course. It was my first course by myself. It was called English 1B at Berkeley. And there were certain things that had to be on the syllabus, and Death of Ivan Ilyich was one of the things that had to be on the syllabus. And I had never taught it before, but I had always admired it. And I thought, okay, let's see what happens. So these California kids, you know, and at the end of the things I had to say, preparatory material, I asked people just for their impressions, and this girl put up her hand and said, "It was awesome." And this was 1982. And I was from the East Coast. I was from New Jersey. So I took awesome to be a very good term. And I thought, wow, she really got it. It is awesome. The story induces awe. Right? Awe, which is the mind transfixed in the presence of the most important questions. Right? The whole personality riveted on a matter of absolute value and meaning. And I thought, and she's 18 and she got that. Wow, it's a really great story. Fine, we end class. I go out to the yogurt place across the street from the campus. She's in front of me and I don't tell her because I just want to hear what she's going to say. And she asks for a strawberry yogurt. And then she says, "Do you have Hershey's sprinkles?" And the guy says, "Yes." And she says, "Awesome." And I think, okay, I've got to revise my judgment here of whether she actually got the story or not.
Story and the sprinkles.
Yeah, if the story and the sprinkles are both awesome, no.
Yeah.
Something's wrong somewhere in the picture. But I think she actually did get the story, right? And I think, you know, that awesome meant different things in different contexts for her. Anybody would get this story. Right? Tolstoy is not a difficult writer to understand. Not at all. I mean, he labored very intensely to be perfectly understood and very clearly understood. Right? This story comes at an interesting moment in his career. It comes at a moment when he's taking a new path in his career. Everybody in here knows Tolstoy, right? The name is familiar to all of you. You probably all have read something of his. My guess is that if I said Tolstoy, you would probably say War and Peace, right? Most of you. And those of you who didn't say War and Peace would say what?
Death or Life.
Death, good. Or the other big novel, Anna Karenina, which is 78. And War and Peace is a little earlier than that. I'm curious what you know about Tolstoy.
I know that I read quickly about him when he was born into wealth.
Yeah.
His mother passed away very, very young when he was 6 months old, maybe.
Yeah.
And then his father, when he was about 6 years old. And as he went through his life, now, real quickly, I remember him going through some part of depression. He was not happy.
Yeah.
And I think after that, he wrote Death of Ivan. Iliad.
Yes, that's a rough chronology. That's about right. Yeah.
Then he had a conflict with his religion also.
Big conflict with his church and his state. He was, give you an idea of how wealthy he was a count.
Which is huge.
Real.
Yeah.
Count. So that's nobility. That's a title bestowed by the emperor, the Tsar, in the case of the Russians. Also, give you another feeling for Tolstoy's life, his existence, who he was, how he lived. He probably would be at the level of a DuPont, or who else did we say in the car on the way down? DuPont, Roosevelt, that kind of money in his culture. He's not Warren Buffett.
Thomas was going to say the Vanderbilt, right, Thomas?
Vanderbilt, yeah, it's an old, powerful, respected, solid fortune, the Tolstoy fortune, and he has landed. He has estates and serfs who live on the estates and all of that. He was a serious intellectual from the beginning of his life. So he was learned. And not just in literature, but literature, philosophy, religion, science. What he was most interested in intellectually was social theory, forms of social order. And he was a visionary guy who wanted to establish a mode of social order that would develop the full potential of all the people around him. Because he had serfs, which were the equivalent of slaves up until the middle 60s in Russia, he was very interested in how this population was going to be brought forward, right, in a human way, in a humane way. So he studied a lot about theories of education and spent a lot of time thinking about how to school people properly. Read Thomas Arnold, the father of Matthew Arnold in England, had a whole international community of speculative intellectuals who he communicated with about thinking, learning, and how to inculcate a sense of the value of life in people and how to preserve it. So he was very, very interested in that, in an intellectual way and in a social way. He also had his own personal, David has referred to it, he had his personal requirements, his personal drives, his personal demons, his personal questions that occupied him a lot. And you see them treated in a more historical and worldly way in War and Peace and in Anna Karenina. After Anna Karenina, he starts to treat them very explicitly as moral, lived experience, religious kinds of questions. And he started to write about this material and publish it. His first book about religious life, spiritual life, moral life, philosophical life, life in pursuit of the question, how can I live so that death does not matter? That actually is the problem for Tolstoy from the beginning, right? He had this terrible experience of death canceling out the value of anything that could happen in his life. If I'm going to die, what difference does it make how I behave? What I care about, what I love, or what I do, right? And not just me, but anybody else, right? If the people I love are going to die, what's the point in loving them if they're going to die? Death really became a huge issue for him. There's a great line in a poem by Yeats called 1919, in which he's trying to come to grips with the terrible violence that has savaged his country for decades at the time that he's writing the poem. Really hideous violence. Example cited in the poem: a soldier shooting a pregnant woman to death and then killing her child in her doorway. Routine conduct in Dublin during the Troubles, as they were referred to. Violence on the road, violence of horses. That's the way that stanza begins. Somewhere in the poem, in the third or fourth stanza, he has the lines, "Man is in love and loves what vanishes. What more is there to say?" Now, the essential action of being in love is to experience the value of the connection and the person as permanent. Right? To want it to be permanent, to believe it is permanent, to experience it as always having existed, to experience yourself as not having existed until this was true, permanent and absolute. Now, if that vanishes, where are you? That's the kind of problem Tolstoy was up against. And David's reference to the depression came from that experience. The death of his brother threw him for a loop, and the death of a number of other people just staggered him. Now, if you look at War and Peace from this point of view, and Anna Karenina from this point of view, you can see him struggling with this problem. The death of Andrei, his great hero in War and Peace, a fantastic scene, you know. But Andrei spends a lot of time trying to come to grips with this. The death of Yevin's brother in Anna Karenina is the scene that really undoes Levin, who is the autobiographical projection of Tolstoy in that novel. After those novels, after he's sort of come to grips with the issue himself, he starts writing explicitly autobiographical books about this crisis, morally, mentally, spiritually, that he went through and how he came out of the crisis. The first one is called A Confession. Right? And it's a description of the story of his religious upbringing, his religious falling away, and his rediscovery of the values of his faith. It was banned by the Russian Orthodox Church. Eventually he was excommunicated by the Russian Orthodox Church. Tolstoy's coming through to religion was a coming through to a view of social order without metaphysics. So the reality claims about God are not important to him. The incarnation is irrelevant. Virgin birth, all that stuff out the window. He's not interested in the least in any of the supernatural claims about the life or person of Jesus. What he's interested in is how to live with other people. How to get along, what kind of bonds to form, what are the proper ways to value other people, and what should you care about in life, right? And what kind of society emerges if you care about this as opposed to caring about that? And the answers he came up with were he reduced them to two principles, right? Love, fellow feeling, natural compassion, human kindness. The automatic response of compassion, kindness, and generosity that you feel when somebody's in trouble or when you simply wish out of the overflowing happiness of your heart to do something for them. That is the first principle. The second principle is non-violence in response, non-violent resistance to evil. Passive resistance to evil. These are his two social principles. Compassionate, generous, human kindness, and non-violent resistance to evil.